Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today's episode is dedicated to the important topic of psychological safety and its role in creating a more inclusive and productive workplace. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Karolin Helbig and Minette Norman, co-authors of the Psychological Safety Playbook, which is due out pretty soon, 22nd of February, I think, but we'll speak about that later. So Karolin, Minette, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Susie.
It's lovely to have you on the show. And your book, which intrigued me, which is why I reached out to you, the tagline of "Lead more powerfully by being more human," I think sums up why we're here, but also our quest around creating more human-centered organizations, but also more human-centered leadership. And I know that, Karolin, you've already worked in management and leadership consulting, and you hold a PhD in genetics. So you're constantly using these two different lenses of science and business to create something more human-centered. And Minette, you've spent decades working in the Silicon Valley tech industry, which I think we've decided, and you've clearly decided, needs a more human-centered lens. But we'll come to that later on. And I just think, two so very different profiles, meeting on a subject that's so important. I'm compelled to start there, really, because before the show we were chatting and you told me about your story, which has lots and lots of things to say about psychological safety, but also about human connection. So can we start there? Minette, can you tell us a little bit about your story with Karolin and how you came to be writing a book together?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell this improbable story. Yeah. So here I am sitting in the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and I signed up for an online class in running psychological safety assessments because I was very well versed in the topic, but I didn't know what to do with it in the context of consulting with leaders and how might I help them, develop more psychological safety in their teams. So I signed up for this class that was based on the work of Amy Edmondson. And in the class was Karolin Helbig sitting in Bonn, Germany. And we were in a small cohort within the class together. And we had some sessions where we were in a group of maybe 5 or 6. And I liked her a lot. I liked her outlook, and it seemed mutual. And then one of our fellow students, had a podcast himself and invited me on. It was a leadership podcast. And I was talking a lot about how I really believe we need to do more work on making the workplace more human and more inclusive and psychologically safe. And I was talking about practical things that we could do. And Karolin happened to tune into the podcast. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to finish this story.
Yeah,
I love this story. It's so brilliant.
Absolutely. And I really remember this moment when I listened to the podcast and Minette sharing her insights, her thoughts. And I realized, oh, wow, it was not only love at first sight, but really shared passion and the shared approach. And even though we had so different paths towards what we are doing now is has really, it's completely shared and completely aligned. And we think it's such a wonderful wonderful example of coming together, sharing the same motivation, and bringing rich different backgrounds so that in the end, the product is even richer than one of us could have come up on their own.
It is. And the best thing as well is that I was so not shocked. I was really surprised to find out that you haven't even met personally. And I think, it's a great example also of how you can create a psychologically safe space on a screen, because excuse me, because during COVID, that was the big question. Can you reproduce and create psychologically safe spaces without actually meeting the person? And I think you two are both living examples, as is your book, of what you can create if you're intentional about how you create that space.
Yeah, absolutely. We are living examples of psychological safety within our collaboration, and this collaboration also showed what is typical for psychological safety, that it's really something which grows over time. So one meeting at a time, and it needs time to grow and really develop. So we started out discovering, we are really aligned with what we want to achieve in consulting, in the business world. But then over time, it's really now a friendship, I would say, across continental friendship without ever having met in person.
I know, and that's just amazing. And I think it's a great example of how you can create these spaces so, in inverted commas, simply. So that's what I really liked also about your book, is it's a surprisingly simple and light-hearted approach to a very complex, messy human problem. Let's put it that way. You said it takes time. It does take time. But I know it was intentional, and that's an important word for psychological safety, but I know it was intentional that it be simple and light-hearted. So can you tell us a little bit more about the structure of the book and how it happened that it be full of illustrations and sort of simple plays? Minette, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I probably have to go a little bit back to answer that question.
Oh, feel free.
Because I want to go back to how we started working together, which informed the structure and how we wrote the book. So when Karolin reached out to me after that podcast, I mean, part of it was the email that she sent me after she heard me on the podcast, and it was called Crazy Idea. And so I get this email. This is June of 2021. Is that right, Karolin? Yeah, it's 2 years ago now. Yeah. And it says Crazy Idea. And she said, I heard you on this podcast. We're really aligned. What would you think if we, I heard you say there's not enough practical material on psychological safety. What if we wrote something? And I think the word you used maybe was brochure or pamphlet. We were thinking of just something small. So we started working on a Zoom call, and Karolin set up an online whiteboard for us on Miro. And it all started in a way very playfully. And so I think that even that first meeting, just talking, putting stickies on a virtual whiteboard, brainstorming, everything was very experimental. And it was this question of what if we tried? What if we tried to write something? What if we thought about how we might structure it? And so all of this online brainstorming together led to this structure. And we wanted it to be as short as possible. So Karolin's word of either brochure or pamphlet was really what started it, is let's not make this big 300-page business book. Let's write something useful, right? That people could use accessibly today. And then how we really brainstormed together what we think the biggest pillars, what are the most important topics that inform increasing psychological safety. And, I think we actually got to 6 at one point, and then we said, let's cap it at 5. The 6th one will be for our next book. Like there's another book in here somewhere. But what we really thought would be interesting and unique is the idea that this is something playful as opposed to so heavy, right? Business books are often very heavy. The topic of psychological safety can seem very heavy, very academic. And we thought, what if we approach it in a very different way? And we came up with this idea of a playbook, and not just as like a buzzword, but what if there are actually plays in here? And then we came up with the idea of moves within the plays. So and then we again, brainstorming, we got to 5 plays with 5 associated moves each. So basically the structure is 5 plays and 5 moves. So there are 25 moves in the book, and each of them stand alone. And that was so deliberate that we wanted to make sure you could jump into this book, pick one thing that you wanted to try. It was a fully self-contained explanation, and you could work on that. And then if you wanted to try something new, that also would be self-contained. So that's how we approached it. And it was very iterative. And even the writing process, we each said well, what if we try writing one of the moves each? So Karolin picked what would be the easiest one for her to write. And I picked what would be the easiest. And Karolin, you might want to describe how that all evolved.
Yeah, and probably it was a great idea not to start with a plan, let's write a book.
Yes.
Let's write another leadership book. What we wanted to develop is really something to fill the gap. So there are so many books out there, and a lot of great books about psychological safety. The main one, Amy Edmondson, Fearless Organization, fantastic. However, for leaders who really embrace psychological safety, there was not so much guidance about the how. So they understand now, why should I do it? Why is it so important? But how can I actually do it? And that was exactly the gap we wanted to fill. And we wanted to fill it with kind of material to provide to our clients. Minette and myself, we have leadership consultancies. We are really consulting clients, and we feel the practical need and the need for practical material. And that was the aim of what's now became our book and started as a brochure. Yeah, exactly. And we always ask ourselves how, because we know our audience, no one has time to read a book from A to Z. So it needed to be really concise. It needed to skip everything what is not essential. And that was the way we wrote the book. I think it's because, Minette, you and I, we always had this person in mind, our reader, our future reader. And I love this phrase, kill your darlings. So Minette spoke of the sixth play, which we skipped at some point. We always ask, okay, how can we make it even more condensed, even more essential? And yeah, that's now the 5 plays, and they are also centered around those situations which we encounter during our leadership practice every day. So how do we speak? How do we listen? How do we run meetings? So very practical, and everything else is good.
And it's great because we're talking about practice, and you're very clear about that it is a practice. So you said, at the beginning of the podcast, Karolin, it takes time. Yes, it does take time, but it is a deliberately developmental practice. And I love the fact that your book is, for me, like a Lego factory. So you can go and get which brick you need. And at first I thought, okay, so if I just take communicate courageously, for example, or manage your reactions, if I just take one play, does that make me less effective? And I was thrilled to find that they were self-contained, and there is also recommendations and readings, but also anecdotes of things you've lived, both of you, and situations you've seen, which have contributed to how and why you wrote these certain moves and this play. And I think it's very powerful because it gives permission for me. As I was reading it, I was thinking, oh, so now I have permission, if they're self-contained, to just do one. If I only have time to do one, I can just do one and look at what's next. But I do feel that for me as a reader, and I know everybody reads things differently, there were certain red threads running through the book, emotions of vulnerability, courage, curiosity. I'm always tempted to say humble curiosity, because that's what it's about in your plays, and continuous learning. And I don't know if that's how you intentionally designed it, but they're the red threads that I see running through. And which means as a leader, I'm like, okay, so they are running through as practices, but beneath that, I have things that I can actually practice in a 30-minute meeting or in a 1-minute meeting, or et cetera, et cetera. So did you design it like that for it all to come together as inclusive practices at the end? Or was it really about, let's see what everybody needs and they can take what they need? Karolin, how did you envisage that as you were structuring it and imagining it? Because I'm sure you both imagined it differently, and then you came to a co-created result.
Yeah, I love your question. Maybe just to expand on your permission to pick one, it's also permission to experiment.
Yes.
And this is closely linked to what you just mentioned: curiosity, learning. What did you say? Humble curiosity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's probably one of the reasons why Minette and I are so wonderfully aligned, that these are our deep core values, ourselves. Being committed to curiosity, to openness, and maybe also one other core value, which is kind of a red thread running through the book, is empathy. Empathy and really prioritizing connection. And I think that's one of the reasons why Minette and I also why our collaboration is full of harmony, that we are really committed to those values, and it's not by chance that they appear in the book. However, it's not kind of the explicit topic, but of course it's the values the whole book is grounded in.
And empathy makes me think of, I often get the question, how do you scale empathy? And which is why I like the red threads idea. But coming back to empathy, which is one of your shared values, Minette, I see these plays as scaling empathy, or empathy at scale, whichever way around you want to put it. But was that intentional, or was it just, it was such a shared value and so present that just came into every play?
I think it was, I wouldn't say we intentionally said empathy must be throughout, but it was certainly in the back of our minds at all times, because really what all of it is about is human connection. Yeah. And if that, maybe that is sort of the macro level of what the red thread is, and then there are several other threads, and that leaders must connect with the people they work with. And unfortunately, and certainly, you know, I'm observing all the news in tech these days, and I spent 30 years, as you know, in the tech industry, that gets forgotten all too much. It's instead about what's the technology, what's the business model, and we forget that we are dealing with human beings. Absolutely. And Karolin and I were always, this is about one interaction at a time. And, you know, we really believe that to build cultures, to scale empathy, it's all about one interaction at a time, one conversation at a time, one reaction at a time. And so to get that sort of self-awareness of what a leader's responsibility is, that's what we were trying to bring through this whole book. And that each one of these 25 moves can improve and increase the, you know, the empathy, the psychological safety, the connection with the people around you. So that was always top of mind. So I think the threads that you have picked up on, they were definitely there for us. And we talked about them all the time. And, you know, I think one of the places we actually say there's deliberate repetition in this book. And that was by design, because yes, curiosity, like we could say how many times the word curiosity appears, you know, it's a lot, because you need to show up with curiosity in so many different situations. And so all of that was deliberate. I would say none of it was accidental. But when you think about sort of like the higher level, that was just top of mind for both of us at all times. And, you know, I think one thing that you mentioned at the beginning is that we practiced what we preached in the book. Yeah. And so when we would have our meetings and our sessions, there were definitely times where we disagreed, or where I felt an initial sort of triggered reaction of like, no, I don't want to do that. But then what I would do, and Karolin would do, and I think this was what was so cool about our interaction, is we were like, take that step back, take that moment to breathe, take that reflection. What am I reacting to here? You know, maybe this is some history I have with this topic, and maybe I could get a little curious about why we might explore doing this. And we played as we met. We played around with different ideas, and we didn't use them all. And some of them were bad ideas, but it was all part of the experiment. And I think that really informed the book, because we were sort of living out what we were talking about.
Yeah. And I love the fact that basically the top level red thread is human connection, and you've never actually met physically. To come back to my first, because that was, I mean, the story when you first told me, I was like, wow. And then I thought, why am I so surprised? And I wasn't surprised. I was heartened by that. It gave me hope by the fact that you've created such a brilliant and human-centered piece of work that will have a lot of impact on humans, but you've never met. So I think it's great for the hybrid world we're moving into. Some people with anticipation, some people with apprehension. I think we're all a little bit between the two, depending on what the hybrid model looks like. But I think it's great that the human-centered playbook has come from two people who have never actually met physically, although your minds have clearly met quite a lot, and the result is the playbook. And I think in interconnected worlds, and the more we get into an interconnected digital environment, the more we need what keeps us human. So imagination, emotions, creativity. And for me, psychological safety has always been like one of the foundational blocks of building an inclusive environment. So what do you think about that, Karolin? What does psychological safety bring to inclusion, or vice versa for you?
Yeah, I am still thinking about your fabulous word, hope.
Hope.
And yeah, this is so important. And at the beginning, you highlighted the subtitle of our book, and this is really our kind of our manifesto, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. And the whole workplace needs to become more human again. So Minette talked about how we all tend to forget that we are human beings. Strangely enough, and this is really something we are convinced of, that we need a new leadership paradigm where we don't forget that we are human beings. None of us. The leader is a human being. Every team member is a human being. The clients are human beings, and so on. And really to make to bring this again in our consciousness is really something very important to us. And I think this new paradigm should give us hope, especially in these troubling times, especially with all the challenges we are facing. And I'm really grateful about that we are living examples of giving hope in these times. So.
And it's scary how easy it is to forget that we're human beings. And I know that sounds dramatic, but if I just take those words, you know, and particularly in a virtual environment, you can get quite transactional quite quickly, can't you? Unless you're intentionally inclusive, you can be unintentionally exclusive, and just take it down to task lists, or just not have time to hear what people have to say, or, you know, not read, because reading the room, I always feel that facilitating virtually is almost a different skill set. But you have to be even more intentional about psychological safety. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's where the playbook really comes into itself for me, into its own, is these small, simple, understandable plays that you can actually experiment with without saying to everyone, I'm just doing an experiment. But you can just try them on like a t-shirt and see what works for you and what doesn't. Do I like it? Do I not like it?
I want to come back to the question of inclusion, because the focus of my consulting is really on inclusive leadership. And for me, psychological safety is in many ways the prerequisite or the foundation for an inclusive environment. And so when we think about it, this is certainly true in the US, although it's true globally in different ways, that there's been so much focus on diversity. That's obviously become a lot of the buzzword, and we focus a lot on diversity hiring, like let us make our workplaces more diverse. But really the key step almost needs to be inverted, in that we need to create an inclusive culture where if we hire a more diverse workforce, everyone is going to feel that they have a place here, that they're valued and respected, and that their unique perspective is going to be embraced and celebrated. And so without feeling safe, and I've actually lived and breathed this, being a woman in tech. So, and I'm a woman of privilege. I am a white woman, so I don't have to deal with the aggressions that come across women of color. But here I was, a woman, often the only woman in the room, right? Yep. And I would often feel that it wasn't okay for me to just say whatever came to mind, because I was going to be shut down, or it might be embarrassing. So I had to very carefully weigh my words. I would hold back. I would often agree with the room, even when I didn't agree with the room, because it didn't feel safe to disagree. And this is just my experience. People are having this experience on a higher and more extreme scale every single day. And so it is really incumbent upon every single person who works with teams, whether you are a formal man, and we talk about, like, for us, leadership doesn't come with a title. No, you could be a project lead, you could be a scrum master in an agile team. You are influencing how people experience team environments, or you could be a CEO, and anything in between. And so every single individual plays a role in creating this safe and inclusive environment where people can disagree, or can say, like, one of the aspects of diversity we forget about sometimes is different cultures, right? So Absolutely. Here we are dealing with 3 of us in 3 different countries, and that, different cultures are going to have different perspectives on how we communicate. And we just have to be really curious to learn what works for different people. And, if someone doesn't want to speak up on a Zoom call, how can we invite their voice through chat, through an online whiteboard, through something asynchronous, but make sure their voice is heard and invited. So there's so much to be done, but I really feel that this psychological safety is foundational to inclusion.
Otherwise, you can't have discussions on diverse perspectives, can you?
Exactly.
Because I think I often get psychological safety. You mean you want me to be nice?
Right.
And my answer to that is, I don't want you to be unkind, but psychological safety isn't about the threat of challenge or the absence of threat. It's about the presence of connection, as we established right at the beginning. And I know in the reading recommendations, you've got some Daniel Kahneman stuff around system 1 and system 2, and things that I use to navigate discussions and experiential learning around bias and, cultural bias, cognitive bias, all types of bias. And I'm just hearing that we need to step back. I mean, it's very clear in all the plays, there's a slowing down of the pace of how we think, and so that we can have a look at what we think, as opposed to just going from fight or flight and just reacting. So responding as opposed to reacting, if you like. And I think that is really helpful for any leader of families, communities, projects, organizations, CEOs, society in general, because I think diversity is about difference, but you don't necessarily have inclusion because you have a diverse group. And that really came out for me in the way you explained those plays, and also how they can play out, if you like, because, understanding them is one thing, and then trying them and them maybe not playing out will bring up other questions. So, how, in your experience to date, if you try a play and it doesn't work as you thought it might, how do you remain curious about that, Karolin? What's your experience about that?
Yeah. And I mean, as a scientist, I know this all the time, that there are experiments that doesn't work out, right? So it's not something speaking against the experiment. This time it's information, valuable information. This didn't work. Interesting. That's also valuable information, data points. And then it's not, the reaction shouldn't be, okay, I stop experimenting. No, the reaction should be, okay, what's my next best experiment? What can I now learn about? And that way, you are experimenting forward and you are learning more and more, and not ignoring what you learn out of failure is a really crucial step. And maybe just to link that back to this really vital question of diversity inclusion. Now the team leaders, we make so much effort to hire diverse teams, right? Hire diverse talent. And now these diverse talent sit in the companies, and their potential is not really used. It's at least not fully used. And leaders are responsible to unlock this fantastic potential which is there. And our playbook is really giving them tools how to do it. And it doesn't mean that you need a lot of extra time. It doesn't mean that you need to sit down one-on-one for hours. It's more about doing what you do, but in a different way, with a different attitude. And we give very small and simple actionable things you can try and see what works for you in your setting. And you touched upon Kahneman and System 1 and System 2. And this is one of the most impactful ways of improving our thinking and acting, to think about our thinking. Right? So become more aware of the limitations of our brain, for example, or become more aware of our tendency for biases, because what we know, we get to be able to manage.
Yes.
What we don't know, we are just acting blindly. We are just following our automatic reactions.
Yeah, so inclusion starts in system 2, if we take his system 1 and system 2.
Yeah.
Because I think, well, that's unconscious bias, isn't it? That's the work on it. Once it's conscious, then the work starts. So once you've got enough distance to understand what your bias is, because everyone has bias, then we can do something with it. Which brings me to the subject of measurement. Now, I get asked this a lot, and I'm sure both of you do. How do you measure psychological safety? And should we be measuring it at all? Minette, do you want to give us your opinion on
I'll
that?
start, and then I'll turn
Yeah.
it over to my fabulous co-author for her input. So it's funny because, we met in this class that was all about running measurements. Basically,
Yes.
it was running these Fearless Organization Scan is the name of it. And it's based on 7 questions that Amy Edmondson developed in her work, The Fearless Organization. So we were both curious about learning how can we measure psychological safety, and we signed up for this class, and we are now both certified in running the assessments. And here's what I think about it now, having gotten that education and run several of them with actual organizations, is that some organizations need data before they'll do anything. And if it's useful to them to run one of these surveys to say, oh, we are here at this point in time, we are at this level of psychological safety. Now we know how to take action. That can be helpful. I'm actually less of a believer in the metrics, honestly, because I feel like, if it's useful for you as a starting point, that's fine. But really, it doesn't matter where you are. It's what you do to continue to increase and build and nurture psychological safety every single day, with or without a measurement.
Yes.
So for me, I feel like it's entirely optional. But if people feel like I need to know, I need a pulse, like a pulse check of where we are, fine, let me run this survey for you. But then I would say, do not stop with that. Just like any survey, they do all these employee surveys. And often I've seen in organizations, even I've been a part of, it stops with the data. Like, okay, here we are. We'll run another one next year or next quarter. What to me is important is the action you take based on the data. So if we say there's the survey that we run has these 4 main facets. So if there's an issue on inclusion, for example, that shows up in the data, maybe we really want to focus our efforts here on what can we do to increase inclusion, and let's crowdsource some information on this, and let's work on that. So for me, the data can inform where we focus our efforts, but it must not stop at the data. It really has to be action oriented. And so for me, like, I don't want to go into a client engagement, for example, saying we're just going to run a scan and we're going to have a debrief conversation and then I'm going to go away. Because to me, that's wasted time and money for all of us. I think the real work is, now what do we do? And that's where our playbook comes in. And that's where Karolin and I really want to do work with organizations. Do you mean it? Do you want to go deep? Let's play with some of these things. So that's how I think about it. And I'm curious to hear Karolin.
Yeah, Karolin, tell us what's your opinion?
Absolutely reflecting how I think about it, even though I'm a scientist, so I'm naturally prone and biased towards measuring, and also my many years with McKinsey really that's professional bias towards measuring. But I also have this experience that measurements sadly often are just an excuse and all there is, and nothing more. So I just recently had a longer discussion with a big client here. They have great measurements and turned out that some leaders are really for longer time read in trust, read in really key parameters of collaboration, trust, I don't know how the other parameters. And then I ask, okay, what do you do? For me, that would be the starting point. Like you do in science, you measure something and then the interesting things begin. However, they stopped there for years. For years, some leaders were known to be leaders to avoid because they are not paying attention to crucial parameters, even though they get this very clear feedback. So if you use data and parameters and measurements for an excuse not to do anything, that's really a bad idea. And instead, I also would advise to really go ahead and experiment, for example, based on our playbook, where you really, we offer a range of 25 really specific things you can do. Pick one, experiment, and see what happens. And if you are committed to measure anything, then what we saw working is asking your teams in a maybe anonymous way. You don't need to stick to this 7-question scan. But for example, having feedback after meetings. If you really want to commit to run your meetings in a more inclusive way, it's a good idea to ask people if they did feel included. If they did feel I could speak up with disagreements and so on. So Minette, you mentioned those meetings in the tech industry where you felt I couldn't disagree with the room, right? Had you had such a feedback afterwards, you could have, things could have surfaced and things could have been addressed. But that way, nobody knew about that maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the scary questions though, isn't it? Because often they're followed by a courageous conversation. Did you feel included?
Yeah, which people mostly want to avoid, right? And that's why we have communicate courageously as our first play. Like you have to go there to those uncomfortable subjects and really just work through the discomfort. Yeah.
And maybe that's a measure as a leader of how willing I am to either experiment or to intentionally step into an uncomfortable place to further the conditions I create for my team and for my organization. Maybe that's a measurement.
Yeah, and the more you strengthen the connection, the easier it gets to discuss those uncomfortable topics.
I'm a little bit intrigued because you mentioned a book 2. So you've already got a 6th play that maybe is going to go into book 2. Tell me a little bit about book 2. What would be in book 2? Would it be the same type or?
Yeah, we are still working on our crazy idea Miro board, and we have a simmering pot there, so a frame called simmering pot, and we have a bunch of rich ideas in there. One, and probably that was planned as play 6 because it's such a crucial situation at work is feedback.
Yes.
So how do you handle feedback situations? However, now having made progress, we also have many more ideas. And
I can imagine.
and for sure, we envision for book 2 something as concise, as playful, as approachable as we've created with book 1. And further topics could also be things like what we see many people are concerned about. What can I do when I find myself in an organization that doesn't value psychological safety and that's maybe even toxic? So what can I do then?
Wow. Okay, I'm excited now for book 2. Book 1 is only out next week, but I'm still excited for book 2.
Yeah, we definitely, it is one of the things that we know for sure. And, you know, everything to us is still open, but we know for sure that there will be more work that we're going to do together, that we're not done with this. One book was not our only thing. And that, there are lots of ideas. And, you know, that last one that Karolin just mentioned, this comes up a lot even in workshops that we do. This question of like, I'm at a director level or I'm in the mid-level of management and I truly believe in psychological safety. I'm doing everything I can in my team. However, our senior leaders don't value it. That's what Karolin was just alluding to. We don't have the answer to this one. This is a really tricky one. And of course, we encourage people to keep doing the work where they can, but it's something we actually want to learn more about and, you know, do our own research on it, not necessarily academic research, but gathering data where we can on what actually works when you're in that kind of a toxic or not safe environment. How much can you influence? So I think there's a lot for us to explore and learn. And we're continuous learners. Of course, we're voraciously reading and learning and talking and, working with teams. And I think the more work we do on this with teams, the more that will inform our next book as well.
It's exciting research though, isn't it? It's exciting to see how people react and what everyone can learn from it, and then how you can simplify it down into something that people can actually use as like a play, to take your words.
Exactly.
A play. Okay, well, time is running, but while we're waiting for book 2, would you have a call for action for our listeners who are sitting there thinking, okay, So that's what psychological safety is. And now I've got a book that can help me think about how I could either create those conditions or carry on trying to create those conditions. What would your call to action be, Karolin, for those people listening?
Yeah, first of all, maybe go to our website, the psychologicalsafetyplaybook.com, and really explore the resources we offer. We offer, for example, a sampler chapter. We offer an overview, a glimpse into the book, and so on. So you'll find rich material there. And of course, read the book, pick one move, and just start experimenting.
Excellent. Thank you. Minette, what would your call to action be?
So I'm going to add on. So yes, and
yes,
the website and the book. And then my further call to action is, don't keep this to yourself. Like, as you start to do the work and say, like, I'm going to try something, talk about it with your colleagues, talk about it with your manager, say, I've just discovered this new resource that's coming out on February 22nd. Can we maybe do a book club? Can we all get the book and talk about what we as a team can do better together? And I think, Karolin and I talk about building a movement. A movement starts with one or two people who are passionate about something, and they start to spread the word, and then it grows and grows. And so we really do want people to share this work with everyone they either interact with professionally, their families, their schools, their communities, because we believe that this can be transformational, but only if it takes off at scale. And so we want people to really spread the word and share it and buy a book for a friend and pass it on, and send our URL for the psychologicalsafetyplaybook.com to everyone and say, hey, can we try something here? So
yeah, and we are really excited about that. We just got our first volume order. So a large company here in Germany ordered 100 books.
Wow.
Because they want to provide their top leadership team with the book. They have a leadership event beginning of March, and that's a great idea. That's a great starting point to really get the discussion going and to really put it on the agenda.
Yeah, and I love the idea of starting a movement and basically just what I call democratizing access to these type of plays so that you can use them anytime, anywhere. And I'm also hearing creating, I'm going to use my words, a tribe that shares as to how well those plays have worked and what they've done with them and what they haven't. So I'm going to invite all our listeners, first of all, to read your book. And second of all, to come and find you. So at the psychologicalsafetyplaybook.com, I heard. I'll put these in the show notes so that people can just click on them. And where else can they find out more about you both and what you do? Or is that the main place?
Oh, no, we're both on LinkedIn. So we love people to connect with us on LinkedIn. And it's just at Karolin Helbig, at Minette Norman. And then we each have our own websites for our own business. So MinetteNorman.com and KarolinHelbig.com. But, LinkedIn, connect with us, follow us, interact with us. We want, as we said, we want to keep learning from everyone's real world experiences and increasing the knowledge out there. So yeah, we really encourage people to get in touch with us.
So please. And I think LinkedIn is a great platform. And also we talked about our simmering pot and
yes.
we have in mind. So we really are open to your ideas, your experience. So please go ahead, share with us. And we are really eager to throw your ideas into our simmering pot.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'll leave our listeners with the call to action to also throw their ideas, however crazy, into your simmering pot.
Please.
And I think this podcast is an example of how LinkedIn can work very well, because that's how I contacted both Karolin and Minette, because I was interested in finding out more about 1, your work, 2, you, and 3, the playbook. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your stories, your insights, and your playbook with us. And it's been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susie.
Thank you, Susie. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, and I'm waiting for book 2 now. Let me know when it's ready.
Working on it.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie.